Gogolab. This film is significant because it's believed to be the only Bollywood monster movie in existence, and judging by the name, you can probably tell that the movie employs many of the tropes of the kaiju genre. The plot synopsis is that there's a giant monster seen by a group of teenagers who tell the cops who don't believe them. In the end, a scientist gives a poison to his daughter, which is what ends up killing this creature. Indradhanush Films is known for producing Gogolab, and that's it. They never produced anything else. Because the company that produced this fell off the face of the earth after its release, no copies of the film survived, as it was pretty much seen as a complete failure by every metric. The film's soundtrack and a few screenshots from it have survived, but besides that, any actual footage is nowhere to be found. And because this film was made by a company that now ceases to exist, finding a copy of this thing seems next to impossible. Donkey Kong Plus. Mario vs. Donkey Kong is a really underrated title for the GBA, as it's one of the most fun and innovative games on the platform. But few people know that the game actually had an earlier version that was more ambitious. This version, under the name Donkey Kong Plus, would have taken advantage of the GameCube Link feature, where players could create stages to play on the GameCube, and then port them over to the GBA to play them. It's unknown why this feature never survived in the final version, although there was a level editor in the sequel for the DS. There is some video of the level editor feature being used, but not very much of it. That small sample, combined with a few screenshots, is all that's survived.
When I grow up, I want to find the perfect woman, and as often as possible. I want to do nothing really well.
When I grow up, I don't ever want to visit the hair replacement center.
I want to have pizza whenever I want it.
Oh, Grow Up. Coming Wednesdays this fall on ABC.
Vendela.
Oh, Grow Up. This was a series that aired on ABC in 1999, only for a few months before it disappeared completely. The series is about a group of former college roommates who find themselves roommates again in adulthood. The series had a rather turbulent existence on ABC, struggling to find an audience, and the change in time slot to accommodate Who Wants to Be a Millionaire didn't help matters, as it only further alienated viewers, as if the immature humor and overall dumbed-down feel of the show didn't do that enough. The pilot was on YouTube for a short amount of time but was later removed, and because of that, there now exists zero footage of the show available. All that exists today is the short promo you just watched.
Here's the game where knowledge is king and lady luck is queen. It's the Joker's Wild.
Joker, Joker, Joker!
The Joker's Wild 2006 reboot. The Joker's Wild is an iconic game show from the 70s. When people think Joker's Wild reboot, most of the time what comes to mind is the reboot hosted by Snoop Dogg a few years ago. There were actually multiple attempts at rebooting the game show in the mid-2000s, however, and obviously they failed at doing it. In 2006, a couple of pilots were taped for a planned syndicated run the following year. These pilots were pitched to NBC, who planned to air them across their affiliate stations, but this deal was eventually stopped by the distributor, which did not like the proposed offer and couldn't agree on appropriate compensation. As a result, the series never happened, and the two pilots are now lost. Mario and Sonic at the 2014 Olympic Games 3DS port. At this point, it's pretty well known that the Mario and Sonic at the Olympics series is a staple every 2 years, releasing for whatever the current Nintendo console is at the time. The 2014 edition, Mario and Sonic at the Sochi Winter Olympics, was the first game in the series to not have a handheld port, as all the previous entries in the series did have one. David Corliss, the at the time Sonic brand manager, gave a vague answer in an interview that could be interpreted as a 3DS version not being planned to release, opening up the possibility that there was a 3DS version at one point in development. Some evidence in favor of this being the case was a listing on the UK version of Amazon, and the fact that for the 2016 Olympics the game did get a 3DS port. It's unlikely we'll ever get any kind of closure as to whether the 3DS version ever existed.
Very good though. Should play it.
Yeah, I thought it was some confusion about whether or not there be a 3DS version, but
Why there's no 3DS version?
there's?
There isn't.
Isn't?
No.
Okay.
It's 101 Dalmatians.
Love it!
Then a show about every kid's favorite subject, recess.
Cover me. I'm going in.
And we'll boldly go where no kid show has gone before.
The Break-In. In 1996, a short called The Break-In was pitched to Disney and would later turn into the series we all know as Recess. It features notably different character designs, as the character designs in the pilot were not set in stone and were essentially placeholders that were always planned to be changed in the final series. Despite this, from what little footage is available, we can still see some similarities. The pitch pilot wasn't completely animated, and most of what was animated is actually shown on the Disney Channel during a promo of 101 Dalmatians. The rest of the pilot was in animatic form, and hasn't been available to the public in any form, and has a slim chance of ever being released. Grand. This was a sitcom that aired on NBC in 1990. Unlike most short-lived sitcoms that fall into obscurity, this one managed to get 2 seasons instead of 1. It separated itself from other shows of the time by being a satire of soap operas, which at the time were a more popular genre than they are today. The premise was that the show focused on 3 families in the titular Pennsylvania town. The first season had a very decisive ending, but the network still renewed it for a second season. And with many of the crew choosing not to stick around, there were a lot of changes to the show that didn't sit well with the audience. As a result, the second season was considerably less popular and is now very difficult to come by. Only 2 minutes of footage from one season 2 episode is currently available. The $1 Million Pyramid. The $1 Million Pyramid is a Wii game based on the Pyramid series of game shows. The actual game itself is completely found, as it released for the Wii with no issues, and can most likely be bought secondhand today and played on any Wii console. The gameplay is pretty much what you'd expect, where each 2-player team would give clues to try to get the other teammate to guess a series of words. As game critics started to release their reviews of the games, it was eventually noticed that the photos featured in the reviews were in a completely different art style to the publicly released version of the game. To this day, no one knows what this version of the game even is, or why review copies of the game were different from the actual game released to consumers. Obviously, this review version of the game is lost, and since it's pretty much a shovelware title, there doesn't seem to be much interest in figuring out how there ended up being 2 versions of the game. Bones Skeleton Crew. In 2006, a web series was released that was meant to be a spin-off of the popular series Bones. This web series, entitled Skeleton Crew, did not use the same cast as the actual show. It was available through a subscription service called Sprint TV, which no longer exists, but was also released on Bones' website. The series contained 22 episodes. Every single one of them is completely lost, and it's unknown how findable they really are, as reliable methods for recording and archiving them were a lot more difficult in 2006. A collage of screenshots and the synopses of each episode are the only evidence this web series existed in the first place.
And people all over the country are choosing 1-800-COLLECT to make collect calls so that they and the person they call can be entered. A nationwide manhunt is on to find out who gunned down Springfield's richest man. We now take you to police headquarters.
Calling all cars, calling all cars. This is the chief. Be on the lookout for the following mugs. Groundskeeper Willie. His little slip of the tongue makes him a prime suspect.
I'll kill that Mr. Burns!
Who Shot Mr. Burns? The Who Shot Mr. Burns episode of The Simpsons was a two-parter that bridged the gap between 2 seasons of the show. To build hype for the reveal of the killer in part 2, there was a contest where callers of an 800 number could guess the killer. The winner would then get to be animated into a future Simpsons episode. No one guessed correctly, or at least that's what everyone thought. There was a forum poster who did guess correctly, but they couldn't be tracked down. The commercials advertised in the contest were aired after each airing of The Simpsons on Sundays, and never again after Part 2 aired, as they had served their purpose at that point. Only 2 of them have been found, but this doesn't even amount to half the commercials believed to exist. The rest have become lost.